All right. Welcome to the NodeXL Weekly Weather Report. I'm Steve Boland with Next to Nonprofits, and I am joined by my friend Mark Smith. Mark, how are you today?
Doing well. Good to see you, Steve. Good to be
Always
back.
good to see you too. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more about some things that are different from last week, because the last time we got together, we talked about a specific hashtag that was generated with the idea of trying to create some conversations, but that's not the only thing this tool can do. So what are you going to walk us through this week?
Right. Last time we were looking at reasons for hope. This time we're going to look at two foundations and compare their patterns to one another and to a third discussion, the word philanthropy itself. So let's start with nonprofit. Here in Twitter, we can search for the word nonprofit. We get a lot of tweets. They go on and on and on. And it's hard to get a sense of an overview of what's going on in that stream. We at the NodeXL Graph Gallery have been collecting a lot of nonprofit related topics, and we invite you to come and search for topics of interest to yourself at nodexlgraphgallery.org. I searched for the word nonprofit and got a number of maps and reports back that talk about all sorts of dimensions of the nonprofit world. And a few in particular jumped out at us. One, I think, is that you may want to look for the updated Reasons for Hope map. After last week's show, we updated that map. That's in Graph Gallery. But in particular, we're interested in comparing the MacArthur Foundation, the Knight Foundation, and the philanthropy maps. We'll note that foundations like Knight tend to create audiences, and audiences have circle shapes in our data. I'm going to zoom in here on MacArthur Foundation. MacArthur is a large philanthropy, and it gets talked about a lot in Twitter. In fact, we can look at this map and see that about 3,700 people talked about MacArthur Foundation over about the period of a month. And when they did so, they created a very specific structure, a shape in their crowd. We can see that in this sort of X-ray view of the same map. In this view, we can see just the dots and the lines more clearly. And what I see is a lot of these circles or egg shapes. That's what happens when one person is at the center and a lot of people point in, they retweet that person. And when we see that, we go, yes, that brand has created an audience, but it hasn't necessarily created a brand or a community. A community would be all of these dots cross-connecting with one another, not all just focused in on a center point. So the brand part is here. These are the people who have zero connections. And while that sounds somewhat bad, having no connections, actually, in some ways, in systems like Twitter, a sign that you are a brand, that people can talk about you without necessarily knowing you directly, without necessarily repeating messages from you.
Or as you referenced earlier, the idea that people are having conversations about you, not necessarily with you, because you're important enough that people are talking about your work to other folks or trying to start conversations with other folks. Some of these, of course, aren't spurring conversations. They're just being published in the ether, not being responded to. But it is a recognition that MacFound and these other very large institutions get conversations whether they're involved in them or not.
That's right. And what we would like to show is that they also vary dramatically in terms of their ability to attract this isolate attention, the attention of people like these people who mention the brand, mention the organization without necessarily having to repeat something somebody else said. So I'll give you an example. Here is Knight Foundation. And Knight Foundation similarly has this hub and spoke pattern. It has a pattern in which a few people sit at the center of conversations and a large number of people, we zoomed in the wrong way, let's go this way. Just a few people sit at the center of these conversations. They're the hubs. And so what we'd like to do is show that, again, there's a relatively small number of people who are the isolates. And now let's contrast this with yet one more topic, and that's this word, philanthropy.
Wow.
Philanthropy is different, and we'll open up that X-ray view as well. But you can see that philanthropy is different because a very large group of people say the word philanthropy because it's a concept. It's not necessarily an organization, admittedly, but this shows just how different a word could be. It could be a brand. It could be something that lots of people can mention without being stimulated by a piece of content already. And so we want to be able to contrast the shape of your crowd, not just the size of your crowd, by building these network maps. And I'll remind folks that you can also come to Connected Action and you can get these maps, and that Next in Nonprofit offers a discount on these maps.
Right. So we'll come back to that at the end, but if we can go back to that philanthropy one as a contrast, because one of the things that's so interesting about the NodeXL tool is, okay, a lot of these isolate type conversations are just people having a brand conversation about philanthropy, and there's not as many folks to think about how do I engage a community, but there is such numbers here that even those smaller numbers that are kind of creating some other shapes are showing us some stuff. So if we could take a look at some of the mayors of some of those conversations, as you call them.
Right, so this is 4,353 people over a 3-day period.
Yeah, that's a lot.
The leaders of those of this conversation, the people who are at the center of those hub and spoke patterns, are listed here. And if you really wanted to quickly move to the center of listening to the center of the world of philanthropy and Twitter, I suspect hitting the follow button on these 10 people would be a good place to start. These people are really at the center of using the word philanthropy in a way that other people respond to in a very positive way. They retweet these.
Right. And just what we saw last week, though, is so interesting as we look at this list. The roughly fourth person on this kind of top 10 vertices list here, Jess Robleski, has fewer than 1,000 followers, but is creating a shape around that, even with a relatively small number of people. Interesting to see. So fundraiser project manager for another organization. But it's so much easier to probably get in touch and start something with Jess rather than at Philanthropy, which I assume is the that institute in Indiana for study of philanthropy. Is that right? Is that who that hashtag is, or that account is?
It's from the Chronicle of Philanthropy.
Oh, Chronicle. Oh, okay. So very large institutional thing, a couple 100,000 followers, but they're on the same list. And that's what's so interesting about this work to me, is really uncovering. Sure, you could kind of guess at Philanthropy would show up in conversations like this, but who is Jess? What is she doing? How do I learn from that? All those things that are happening because of these maps surface that in a very visible way. Really interesting.
Right. So we would argue that Jessica is on this list not because she has many followers, because she doesn't have an enormous number of followers, but because when she tweeted the word philanthropy, other people responded to her in a way that put her in one of these structures at the center.
Right.
And so we would argue that that might make her a member of the B list. Mm-hmm. But I always like to sing the praises of the B list because they might have time to actually hear you. And of course, if you wanted to talk to Jess, you might use words like innovation and nonprofit because those are words that, or at least hashtags, that came very much to the forefront of her use of words. That when we analyzed her collection of tweets versus everybody else who was talking about philanthropy, these were words that mattered more to her than anybody else.
Right. Such interesting stuff. And again, we could spend a lot of time diving into that, but a good example of how the tool can be used when you're not specifically looking at a hashtag kind of thing or a subject, but rather people and what conversations come out around institutions, ideas like that. So we're always happy to talk about different topics or different ways of using NodeXL to discover how people can build better community and do connections. So anybody that is interested in asking us to take a look at a specific topic, idea, hashtag, whatever it might be, please go ahead and tweet at us. I'm at Next Nonprofits. Mark, where can people tweet to you?
Right, at Mark with a C _ Smith on Twitter.
And certainly through the contact information at connectedaction.net too.
That's right. You can always find us over here at connectedaction.net.
So just a quick moment to wrap up with that plug for getting a customized map like this. I mean, certainly we can do some conversations through this mechanism, but if what you're doing just requires a little bit more thought and analysis, you can go to Connected Action, go to Buy Maps. When you actually go to checkout, there'll be a little area for a coupon code. Put in Next in Nonprofits, get some money off, but also then talk about how you can help get some analysis help with using all this information, because it is so rich. There's just so much to do.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we'd be happy to make some sample maps, and we think that you can get some insight into these patterns of connection that right. Just seeing the volume of people just doesn't really reveal.
Absolutely. Great. Mark Smith, Connected Action, thank you. It's always fun to talk with you.
You too, Steve. Thanks for the time.
Sure.